Okay, this is my second entry in the same day. Again, still November 26, 2022. So this one here, I want to sort of run this by various people who may be listening to this. Anybody at all who wants to comment, of course, is welcome to do so. And just to put it in context, I want to talk about certain cadences when it comes to working out and certain schools of thought. Of course, super slow. Doing typically 10 seconds in a positive or lifting phase, 10 seconds lowering phase, really focusing on really good turnarounds so that you are minimizing force and maintaining continuous tension on the muscle. And I think of it principles versus practices. So the principle, of course, that would be at play, most people would agree, I think, is to create inroad, fatiguing the muscles and doing so as efficiently, as safely, and as deeply as possible. And of course, super slow with paying attention to turnarounds and things like that is obviously a very good way of doing that. But one of the things that I do with my clients and seems to, I think, work well, and I've kind of done a variation on it, cadence. So a while back, I followed one of Ellington Darden's program, and he's changed programs at various times, but one of the things he was talking about was doing a 30-second negative and doing 10 repetitions, roughly 1 second up, 1 second down, and then finishing your set, doing about 10 reps, and then finishing your set with a 30-second negative. So I've read a lot of books by Ellington Darden over the years. Many people are familiar with his work, and I'm sure many people have also read many of his books. And I thought, I'll give this a shot. I followed a 6-week program. And after a while, I did get some results from that. But my point here is not to sort of really belabor or assess that program per se. But as I looked at it going back, there was a couple of things about it that I liked and some things about it that I didn't like. First of all, in order to start with a 30-second negative, in many cases, in order to get to the top of an exercise, you were to get there rather quickly in order to stop lowering. In other words, you had to lift the weight rather quickly in order to start lowering in a 30-second period. So I am uncomfortable with the idea of that quick lift to get to the top, as I think there's safety concerns because you're doing that when you're completely cold, and I can see potential for injuries in doing that. The other thing I was uncomfortable with was I was uncomfortable with the 1 second up, 1 second down with the middle reps. And I know that in the book, or yes, it was an ebook by Ellington Darden, he stresses using good form. And I know other people on the forum that I was on for a while talked about being able to keep good form even at that speed. And maybe they have better motor control than I do, but I don't think that I can avoid using momentum or dropping the weight when I'm using that speed. I didn't injure myself doing it, but I was uncomfortable. And I was especially uncomfortable with training clients at that speed. And then ending with a 30-second negative, that I was okay with. And if you do the math on that, it comes to about a 90-second time under load. Actually, less than that, 30, 60, and if you're doing 1 second up, 1 second down, so it's about 80 seconds. So well, I did like some parts of it, and I know others have said there's nothing magical about the negative part of a rep, and I think that's probably true. I think when I look at, for example, X-Force machines and things like that, I don't know that it's the negative part is magical or anything like that, but I do think that if you think intensity as the amount of inroad over time, meaning you do a deeper inroad in less time, then I think that those X-Force machines can do that. But anyways, this is what I've come up with, and I use this with my clients. So first of all, it's a little bit different with exercises that either have a lockout involved or exercises that don't. So going back to turnarounds and the super slow modality, If you were doing an exercise such as a leg press or an overhead press, the goal at the top turnaround when you're at the top of the rep is not to pause and in fact not to lock out your limbs, which would involve you resting, potentially hyperextending your joints, either your knees or your elbows, depending if it's upper body or lower body, and then slowly coming back to the bottom and then just barely beginning. And you know, often the idea of just doing 3 seconds for the first inch up, 3 seconds for the first inch down, and letting the rest of the speed of the rep sort of organically takes care of itself makes a lot of sense to me. As opposed to an exercise like a pull down, where if you're pulling down when you're at the bottom, when you've lifted the bottom of the positive rep, the end of it, there is no rest there. And in super slow modality, you hold it there for a second or two and really feel the tension and then slowly release back. So I'm going to start with exercises where there is a lockout and what I come up with. So in that case, I start with a 10-second positive and a 10-second negative. And then once that's done, I use, I'm forgetting now if I said that this was a lockout or not lockout. So let's say there is a lockout in this one here. So, or no, sorry, no, it would be 10-10, so that would be the one where there is a lockout. So let's say a pull down. 10 seconds for the first lifting phase, 10 seconds for the lowering phase. Then I would have my positives would be 5 seconds, and then I would do a hold at the bottom for 5 seconds and then come back in 5 seconds. And I would do 4 of those reps. In other words, there'd be 4 5-second holds. And then at the end of that, I would do a 20-second negative. So what's happening, if you do the math, it comes to about 95 to 100 seconds. And if I've picked the weight right, the idea would be that if when I'm doing that last 20-second negative, that would be pretty much failure right there. And even if it's not complete failure, as long as it's quite difficult and I continue to lift the weight over time, or if it's really far from failure, then just do extra reps as I go. So the reason for the 20-second negative at the end, so first of all, let me go back. The first slow rep serves as a bit of a warm-up. The 5-second reps in the middle, 5 seconds, 5-second hold, 5 seconds down, is slow enough to still be strict, and I like the hold part of it. And then as clients and myself near failure, this is where there is potential. I know that the last rep is supposedly the safest rep, but again, that's the last rep as long as you do it properly. And it's during the last rep where people will forget why they're there to really fatigue the muscles. And even though you instruct people and whatnot, even though I know it better, whatnot, it's very easy to start to forget for a second and try to finish the rep. And this is where compromise and form can occur. Whereas if my last rep, so to speak, or my last effort is a negative, it's much easier, in my opinion, to keep good form lowering the weight than it is at the end. And if that's the case that I need to do more, then I do my best at that point. But I've already reached what I wanted to do for that day, and extras are a bonus. And if I haven't got enough, let's say that I could have done more and I don't, I raise the weight the next time, and eventually it gets to be okay. I'm still progressing. As long as I'm progressing, eventually it'll get difficult. Otherwise, I would eventually use the whole weight stack on all my machines, and that hasn't happened in 40 years, and it's never going to happen. Now, for exercises where there is no lockout, slight difference, I still want to get a 95 to 100 second time under load. So it starts with a 10-second positive and a 20-second negative. And then I do 5 reps that are 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down. There's no pause, there's no hold because it would be a lockout. And then I end again with a 20-second negative. Same reasoning, same idea, only difference is there's no hold because there's lockouts involved in that particular in those particular exercises. Now, another reason as a trainer is rather than have a stopwatch, and it might still be a good idea to keep track of time under load, I simply record whether or not the client has completed all the reps in between and done the 20-second negative. And if they do extras, then I just say they did it with 2 extras or did it. So there's less to track. I use a metronome to ensure that the speed is good. There's less to track, and I can just ensure they do it. And I think there's a safety aspect to ending with a slow negative rather than pushing people to do a positive, or often, despite your best instructions, or at least maybe others undoubtedly are better instructors than me, but in my best instructions, people forget the primary objective versus the secondary objective, and all of a sudden they start to hold their breath, they heave, they do different things, which is less likely to happen during a negative one. And again, the other thing that'll happen, there's certain exercises where that time under load seems to not work as well. So I'm free to either add or subtract the number of reps in the middle based on whether I think either for a particular exercise or for a particular individual, they would work better with a bit longer time under load or a bit lower time under load. Now, exceptions to this, in some exercises, the way the exercise work also, I have some machines where I think that the strength curve is really off. And yes, I'll try to stay in the hard part and do all those things, but I'll also use stage reps or Johnson reps or zone training, whatever it will, where you are splitting it into either half reps or thirds of reps, starting with the difficult part of the exercise first, then the lesser difficult, and then the easiest at the end. And I find that is a good way to circumvent machines that don't have good strength curves. And finally, with some exercises and some clients, I just stick with strict 10-10, try to do my best to use just modality of Superslow. And with machines that have greater friction, I'll go back to the original Superslow recommendation of 10 seconds up and 5 seconds down, because the friction makes the negative or lowering part too easy. So anyways, I'm throwing this out there in order to get feedback. Tell me where I'm going wrong, tell me where my thinking is wrong, tell me if it makes sense to you. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing is greatly appreciated.